Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Crimson Star, an alien sci-fi harem adventure, by Michael Dalton, narrated by Mason Lloyd. Chapter 1. I lay back in the chair in our bedroom, just letting Jacqueline work. She was between my knees, doing what she liked to call her thank you note. If the sex had been especially good, she liked to give me a final blowjob to end the night. So she was now down there using hands, mouth, and breasts to get me off for a third time. Sex with Jacqueline tended to alternate between two extremes, basically letting me do whatever I wanted to her voluptuous little body, and withholding even basic missionary position sex because she was mad at me or trying to get something out of me. Tonight had been a whatever I wanted night, and I sat there trying to fix the day's events in my mind so I could do my best to keep things that way. Jacqueline and I had been dating for 5 years and living together for 1. When we met in college at USC after I got out of the Marines, she was the 19-year-old daughter of wealthy parents from Newport Beach. I was a 23-year-old kid from San Diego attending on the GI Bill. I spotted this hot little blonde with a killer rack at a party one night, and I was just looking for a hookup. I found, in late 2007, at the height of the war in Iraq, that stories from my Marine days were an effective panty dropper with these mostly sheltered college girls. They certainly worked on Jacqueline. But in the days afterward, she was unwilling to let me just move on to the next hookup. I was different, exciting, just a little scary, and her parents took an instant dislike to me because of my background. So of course that made me the ideal boyfriend for a rebellious rich girl, and she threw her whatever I wanted act at me until she'd locked up my attention. Yet even with the incandescent sex we had, I found that keeping Jacqueline happy was a full-time job. High maintenance was her daily baseline, and she often went well beyond that. But she was a job I was willing to shoulder because happy Jacqueline was also whatever I wanted Jacqueline, and in bed she was about as uninhibited a girl as I had ever met. 5 years in with her, I'd done just about everything I'd ever envisioned doing with a girl. Public sex, threesomes, even lesbian sex. When she was in the right mood, there was nothing I asked her to do that she refused me. So that night, early in our relationship, I was still deep in denial about what I'd gotten myself into. I only cared about the feel of Jacqueline's hot little mouth sucking eagerly on my cock. She lifted off, stroking me rapidly. "Almost there?" I nodded. She wrapped her plump breasts around me and rocked back and forth. "Does that feel good?" I could only grunt. She went down again. She had this thing she did with her tongue, fluttering it against me as she sucked, and after a few more moments it finally pushed me over the edge. With a groan, I pulled her head down, just pushing past her palate, and squirted uncontrollably into her throat with what little I had left. I felt her swallowing and sucking until I was finished. Then she stayed there, sucking softly until I was completely limp. She gave my dick a final few kisses and climbed into my lap. I loved happy Jacqueline because she did things like that, and it had taken only a year of dating for me to convince myself that happy Jacqueline was normal Jacqueline, and unhappy Jacqueline was the result of one thing or another that I'd done wrong. Naturally, she did everything she could to make me think that way. She bit at my ear gently. "Please don't go on this thing." The pleasant feeling she'd given me began to recede. "What thing?" Except I knew damn well what she meant. "The climbing. You know how much I hate it when you do that kind of stuff." I'd been planning for a long time to go climbing with some friends of mine in the southern Sierras. I had gone through the Marine Assault Climbers course about a year before getting out, and since then I'd gotten seriously into sport climbing. This was going to be my first real wilderness climb, and I had spent months training for it. We were supposed to leave that Friday. I groaned. "I can't bail on them now. We're leaving in 2 days." "Please?" I'm so worried. I recognized the edge to her voice. It was unhappy Jacqueline waking up. By then I'd learned the hard way that she could switch gears on me in the blink of an eye. I desperately wanted to argue with her. I'd been looking forward to this trek for a long time, and my friends had planned it with the expectation that I was going to be there. If I backed out now, I wouldn't just be depriving myself of the experience. There was a very real chance they would have to cancel as well, or at the very least postpone things. Her teeth were still on my earlobe, but it no longer felt so affectionate. After 5 years, I knew very well what Jacqueline would do if I ignored her wishes, and I knew it was vastly worse than what I would face from my friends. Unhappy Jacqueline could be an absolute nightmare, so I had quickly learned to do whatever it took to keep her away. My friends would be pissed, but forgive me. She would make my life a living hell for weeks, and it would be a long time before I saw another whatever I wanted night. Hating myself for it, I relented. Okay, I won't go. She relaxed, cuddling against me. Thanks. I love you. Nights like that would set the precedent for later. Her using sex to manipulate me giving up things I enjoyed to keep her happy. Had I been wiser, I would have seen the red flags. But I still loved her despite all this, and within 6 months I would propose. I hadn't thought about that night in years, but as I watched my terrified fox girl wife Merindra struggling to rappel down a 200-foot cliff, I remembered why my climbing skills were so rusty. I cursed Jacqueline wherever she was, but mostly I cursed my younger self for letting her do what she did to me. Merindra was not Jacqueline, and she had none of Jacqueline's infuriating qualities. But she had one thing about her that was causing some issues, and that was her intense desire to continually prove herself to me. So it was par for that course that she didn't tell me she was afraid of heights, until it was much too late for me to do anything about it. The first couple of hours down from the summit, where we'd arrived through the crystal circle, were grueling but not terribly challenging. The mountain reminded me a lot of the Sierras. It was a giant heap of shattered granite, and we had to slowly and carefully navigate about a mile of loose stones and broken boulders, spotted with patches of snow. Had this been a peak back on Earth where the trail was clear and established, the trek down to the foothills might have taken us just a few hours. But we had no trail to follow, no idea which direction was safe and which was not. We had to make our own way down without knowing exactly what was below us. Even with Mereceeree occasionally taking off and flying around, it was hard to know what we were facing until we got there, so we had no choice, except to take it very slowly. The first mile made me realize just how much I'd taken for granted when it came to hiking and climbing back home. Having a cleared trail to follow was an enormously different proposition from climbing over random boulders. I had to warn the girls to stay off the snow because of the risk of falling through into a gap between the rocks. I didn't want any broken ankles. Between the altitude and not wanting anyone to get hurt, our progress was excruciatingly slow. After 2 hours, I called a halt, feeling like my thighs were going to explode. I could tell the girls were struggling as well, though none of them said anything. "This should get easier the further down we go," I said, "when the air isn't so thin." "I feel like there's a rope around my chest," Narilora said. "We're going to take it easy. Don't force yourself." The field of rocks gave way to more solid ground after another hour. We'd come down about 1,000 feet, and I felt every one of them. Before us, a ridge went straight out in a near knife edge the way I wanted to go, but it looked too risky. Looking down, I could see a way to switch back along the slope, but we would need to slide down about 40 feet. Staying roped together, we worked our way down on hands and feet until we reached a ledge that went for quite a ways back in the other direction. This stretch wasn't too hard, but we weren't descending very far. After half a mile, the ledge opened up into a broad ridge. Below us, the slope seemed manageable, so I turned us again, and we climbed down another field of rocks, though this wasn't as steep as the other one. It was now midday. We'd come down maybe 1,500 feet. We stopped again to eat and refilled our water packs from a nearby snowdrift. "Can you scout us again?" I asked Mereceeree. "I've lost track of what's below us now." When she'd regained enough energy, she spread her wings and took off into the wind. For a few minutes, she circled above us, looking out over the areas below. Then she glided back in, landing carefully on a large rock. "There's a sheer cliff right below us here. We will have to circle around that way." She pointed off to our right, where I could see a canyon opening up. Beyond it, the ridgeline went for a ways without dropping meaningfully. Maybe 5 miles off, I could see a spot where we might be able to slide down another field of talus, but doing so would put us even further away from the direction I wanted to go. "How high is the cliff?" I asked. "I think not very high." But when we got down closer to the edge, I had to remind myself I was talking to someone who could fly. Of course 200 feet was not that high for her. Fortunately, there was a stable ledge to assess the situation from above. Down below, the canyon opened into a fairly straightforward route down the mountain, and it appeared to lead in a much better direction than the ridgeline. There was a small river flowing through it and areas of flat gravel. All we had to do was get down there. But the only way I could see to get there was down the cliff. I wouldn't have wanted to climb up this cliff given the current state of my climbing skills, but rappelling down didn't look like it would be too hard. I had gone down taller cliffs in my climbing days, and we had practiced belaying and rappelling back in Fangorod for a few days before leaving. "What would you guys say to going down here? From what I can see, that will save us a day at least, and I can see some good spots to camp for the night down there." Narilora looked over the edge and took a deep breath. "I can do it." Merindra didn't say anything, but didn't object either. She just stared down, face pale. I assessed the situation for a few minutes to decide on the best approach. The cliff was high enough that I would have preferred to do it in 2 or 3 pitches. Had I been up here with another seasoned climber, we would simply have rappelled down together. But the girls were not experienced enough for that. Another option was having me go first, then belaying them down from the bottom. I rejected that immediately because it would mean leaving Narilora and Merindra up at the top to start their rappel on their own. I was nowhere near confident enough in their skills to do that. Mereceeree could have flown down and belayed us from the bottom, except for the fact that at 90 pounds she was too small to do it safely. The only real option I could see was for me to belay them from the top. So I explained what we were going to do. Narilora nodded. Merindra just stared at me silently. Everyone took their packs off. Taitalan climbing gear wasn't quite what I was used to. Recreational climbing wasn't a thing on Taitala, but there was a certain amount of climbing involved in prospecting for crystals. Lacking the metal for hammers and pitons, they'd instead developed a variety of things similar to cams and nuts for anchors. They also had analogs to carabiners and belay devices made from reinforced crystal. Part of my challenge here was adapting what I knew to this unfamiliar equipment, but the basic principles were about the same. There were more than enough safe places to anchor us on the top of the cliff, so I used 3 of the cam things to set a triple anchor in a large boulder. Once I was satisfied everything was solid, redundant, and equalized, I set up the belaying device. I decided to keep it simple and just use a direct belay, with the belay device attached directly to the anchor. I would let out the rope to lower them to the bottom. The problem here was the height. 200 feet was a long way for a novice climber to rappel down in one go, even in the best of circumstances. The other problem was that our ropes were only about 100 feet long, which meant I would need to tie 2 of them together. And that meant I would have to pass the knot midway down, meaning I would have to stop belaying them to safely work the knot around the belaying device. This is a fairly basic skill you learn early, but I hadn't done it in 15 years, and I would need to do it while Narilora and Merindra were hanging 100 feet in the air. I figured there was probably an easier way to do this that I wasn't thinking of because my skills were so rusty, but having Mereceeree able to fly down the cliff made this a lot easier. I'd trained her in setting anchors when we'd practiced, and I was confident she would be able to handle it. I created a double anchor with 2 nuts for her to place on the cliff. Though this was working backward, normally you set the nuts, then tied off the rope. This wouldn't be a primary means of protection, just a backup to clip to while I was passing the knot. First, I rigged up the belay. I tied off 2 butterfly loops near the end of the first rope. I would use these to secure the rope to the belay anchor while I passed the belay device around the knot. And while I did it, they would clip onto the anchor below, just in case I screwed something up. That seemed redundant enough. Then I fed the rope down the cliff to the spot where we would hit the knot. Mereceeree flew down to set the anchor, then flew back up a couple of minutes later. I had her explain exactly what she'd done. She did. You tested it? Hung from it? Pulled on it hard? Yes. It is secure. Okay. Let's do this. Mereceeree flew back down to the midpoint anchor, just in case they needed help. I rigged up Narilora and Merindra for the rappel. Narilora was focused and attentive while I did it, but Merindra just stood there, almost frozen. Hey, I said. Okay there? She nodded quickly. After I double-checked everything, Narilora went first. I lowered her down a few feet at a time. She called out just as I reached the butterfly loops. I felt the line go slightly slack. Clipped in, off belay, she called up. I clipped the 2 butterfly loops to the anchor using separate links. Then I unclipped the belay device and moved it above the knot. Once I was certain everything was secure, I unclipped the butterfly loops and resumed lowering her. She reached the ledge below in about another minute. She unclipped herself and called up that everything was good. I pulled everything back up and reset the belay device. Then I turned to Merindra. As I clipped her in, her hands came up and gripped my wrists tightly. I realized she was shaking. What's wrong? I can't do this, she whispered. Hey, it's all good. Narilora made it fine. There's nothing to worry about. She shook her head rapidly. I can't, she sobbed. I took her in my arms. Is it the height? She nodded against my chest. You're afraid of heights? She nodded again. I just held her for a few moments. You asked to come along on this. I know, she sobbed, because you need me. I pushed her back a little and brushed the tears from her cheeks. Hey, where's my brave fox girl who slaughtered all those Basa-Yangs? I've never seen you afraid of anything. I've seen you look death in the face and spit on it. You killed Silas. You sliced his fucking head off. She nodded rapidly. It's just this, she said. I kissed her forehead and held her for a few moments longer. You know we need to do this. Narilora is down there. I don't know if I could haul her back up. Not that far. She nodded again. You can do it. Now she shook her head. Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to keep your eyes on me. Only me. Can you do that? Not down or around. Only me. Can you? She looked up, locking her eyes on mine. I double and triple checked her gear and all her ropes. Then I took hold of the brake line. Just put your hands on the rope. She didn't move, and I had to shift her hands down. Eyes on me. I gently backed her up to the edge. She shook her head. Just hold on. Lean back. I've got you. I had to peel her fingers off of mine, but eventually I had her leaning back on the rope. Just look at me, baby. Look at me. She did, eyes locked on mine. I had to lean forward to keep eye contact with her. Very slowly, I began lowering her down. Just look up at me until you get to Mereceeree. Little by little, I paid out the rope. As she dropped, she kept her eyes upward. You're doing fine, baby. Just keep going. She seemed to get more comfortable with walking down the cliff, but she kept her eyes up. In about a minute, she reached Mereceeree, who had to clip her in, and called up to me. I passed the knot as carefully as I could. Then Mereceeree unclipped her, and I lowered her the rest of the way. When she got to the bottom, Narilora caught her and helped her unclip. I saw her drop to her knees, then Narilora hugged her. They held each other in a tight embrace for a while. Seeing that she'd made it safely, I said a silent "fuck you" to Jacqueline and drew the rope back. When I had it all at the top, I clipped the packs together and lowered them down. Now it was my turn. I had to re-rig things since I was rappelling now, not being belayed, but that took only a few minutes. I checked everything one last time and began my descent. Mereceeree was waiting for me halfway down, clipped into the anchor, smirking. The dark goggles we'd gotten her to wear during the day made her look like she had insect eyes. "This is why you should have taken only Panakangs as wives," she said, as I clipped in to pass the knot around the rappel device. "This is why I'm thankful I have at least one." She laughed. "You should be land-bound." "Come here." I leaned over and kissed her. Then I kept going. When I got to the bottom, Narilora and Merindra were waiting for me. I pulled Merindra into a hug. "Please don't make me do that again," she whispered. "You made it once, babe. You can do it again, if we have to. It will be a lot easier next time." She just held me for a moment or two. Mereceeree retrieved all the climbing equipment and flew back down. I checked to be sure it was all in order, and then packed it up. "Okay, good work, guys. Let's get moving." We descended for about another hour. I knew from experience how fast night could fall in the mountains, so when it looked like we had one more hour of daylight, I called a halt and started setting up camp on a level patch of gravel above the river. I could see tomorrow would be a bit grueling, but we were now around 2,000 feet below the summit, and the air felt thicker already. The route was clear for at least a mile ahead, and we would be able to descend quickly. We were still above the tree line, which meant there was no wood for a fire. I'd brought my jet boil for that exact reason, and we used it to cook dinner. All of us were exhausted, and it was rapidly getting cold, so we went to sleep soon after it got dark. As I lay together with Narilora, Merindra, and Mereceeree, cuddling between the three of them to share our body heat, it occurred to me that in 15 years together, Jacqueline had never once trusted me to the degree the girls had on that climb down the cliff. Chapter 2. It was both ironic and entirely fitting that I didn't truly understand who I'd married until after she filed for divorce. It had been a long time in coming, though. I recognized far too late that unhappy Jacqueline was really her normal state of affairs. Happy Jacqueline only came out when she'd made everyone else as miserable as she was, whether it was me, her parents, her younger sister, her friends, all the way down to random checkers in the supermarket. By that point, her affair with Richard had been going on for years, and our marriage was an environment so hostile that I'd almost have traded it for a return to Iraq. Her parents still hated me, but I was no longer exciting and a little scary. I was just a boring financial analyst trying to give her back the lifestyle she'd given up by marrying me. Sneaking around with Richard and having unprotected sex with him while we were trying to start a family, that was exciting and scary. So that was where her attentions were directed. Jacqueline and Richard got married a week after his divorce was final. Ours had been finalized a month earlier. About 2 weeks after their wedding, I was alone in my apartment on a Friday night, glumly looking through online dating profiles. I'd just messaged this girl who fell into what I'd come to think of as my lottery tickets, girls I would have loved to date but who almost never responded to me. She was 23, a hot, athletic brunette who had profile pictures of her hiking and climbing. Maybe she could get me back into that stuff, I thought to myself, and sent her a message asking about one of her climbing photos, knowing I'd never get an answer. Just as I did it, there was a knock on my door. Almost no one ever came to my door, certainly not at 9:15 on a Friday, so I went on alert. When I looked through the viewer, my head swam in confusion. It was Jacqueline. I opened the door. "Hi," she said. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see how you were." She wasn't quite drunk, but I could tell she'd been drinking. She was dressed up as if she'd been out with her girlfriends. "Can I come in?" I looked down at the big rock Richard had given her. Though I knew better, my mouth said, "Okay." She stepped inside. She'd never been in here before. She'd only dropped the kids at the door. "Where's Richard?" I asked. "He had to work." She looked around at my fairly pathetic apartment. "So, how have you been doing?" I could see unhappy Jacqueline in her eyes, but 15 years of finely honed instincts when it came to her moods told me her unhappiness wasn't about me. "How does it look like I've been doing?" She smiled sympathetically and rubbed my arm. "Poor Will. You need to find someone." I was in the middle of that, I wanted to say, but I didn't. She went over and sat at the bar along the kitchen. Not knowing what else to say, I asked, "Can I get you anything?" "Do you have any white wine?" I had a bottle in the fridge on the off chance I ever got a woman in here. So far I hadn't needed it. I opened it up and poured her a glass. "Not having any?" she asked. I reflexively poured myself one, even though I didn't want it. She held hers out and tapped it against mine. "Here's to new lives." This was such a change from how she'd behaved with me the last few years of our marriage and during the divorce that I really didn't know what to do here. But the silence was getting creepy. "How have things been with you?" I finally asked. She went over and sat down on my couch. I joined her, sitting at the other end. She sighed in a way I'd heard many times. "It's so different when it's all out in the open, not sneaking around anymore." I thought, have you already forgotten who you're talking to? But clearly she had. She spent about 10 minutes just rambling and venting about her and Richard. He worked too much. They couldn't agree on what to do with their new house. He wanted her to keep working and she had expected to quit. He didn't know how to deal with the kids, and so on. Finally, she ran out of gas. "Not like it was when we got married," she said. "Remember our first place?" We'd done pretty well coming out of college, all things considered. I got a job as an analyst downtown. She, with some help from her parents, managed to land a job on the communications staff of one of the county supervisors. But because of that, she wanted to live somewhere nice. So we got a little apartment in Pacific Beach. It cost too much, but she wanted to be near the water. The result of that was that we had little money for anything besides going to the beach and having a lot of sex. Fortunately, those were two things we both enjoyed. And looking into her eyes, I could see that was exactly what she wanted me to remember. I allowed myself a friendly answer. Simpler times, I guess. Her hand came out and began playing with my hair. "I miss those days," she said softly. But if she wanted me to remember all the thank you notes and whatever I wanted nights, I also remembered all the fights with unhappy Jacqueline, the violent arguments that blew up out of nothing, the silent treatment she liked to throw at me for days, how she would sometimes storm out of the apartment and not return until late at night, out doing God knows what. I would later conclude she had cheated on me a few times doing that. And there was plenty of bad sex, too, the times she would just check out emotionally and lie there like a lifeless sex doll to get back at me for one trivial thing or another. She kept playing with my hair and laid her head on her arm. "Look at you. I really hurt you, didn't I? I feel awful about it sometimes." I struggled with a response. I could feel all the old bad habits she'd beaten into me surging back, wanting to forgive her the moment she showed me any warmth. There were too many scars over them now, but even so, I had to fight with myself to stop this from going where it was clearly going. But why was it going there? Why was she even here? For a moment or two I thought, Richard fucked my wife, maybe I should fuck his. And then something occurred to me. I'd gotten myself back in shape. My head was still a mess, but I knew I looked good. She was likely seeing some of that hard, slightly scary ex-Marine she'd met back at USC. He was exciting. Life with a workaholic corporate attorney clearly wasn't. Not anymore. Even worse, from her perspective at least, her parents loved Richard because as a successful Ivy League-educated lawyer, He was exactly the husband they'd always envisioned for her, and her parents liking anything was usually the kiss of death for Jacqueline. So I would have done it.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?